First and foremost, I'm thrilled to be here at Groundhog Day. When Adrian told me about the idea, I thought this was absolutely brilliant. And what's great is that the Chicago Groundhog, yes, we have our own special groundhog, um, and that groundhog, I don't know if they're he's or she's, but regardless, said we're getting spring early. For the rest of the country, I guess it's not, but the Chicago Groundhog, Willie, I think his name is, um, gives us an early spring. And one other thing about groundhog specifically. So even before joining Cloudways, I had the luxury to use and continue to use, personally and outside of this kind of work, Groundhog itself as sort of that CRM, which makes life a lot easier. So this is actually a double bonus for me. So I'm very excited to be here. Let's see if all the wonderful slide action happens correctly. Excellent. I'm Robert Jacobi. You can find me on Twitter at Robert Jacobi. I have, wow, it's getting more and more, over 20 years of experience in the industry, approximately 20 years of agency experience. And I focus on open source partnerships, obviously specifically with WordPress and plugins and tools that enhance the end user experience, the agency experience. Again, tools like Groundhog as well. At Cloudways, a cloud hosting platform for a number of different services. And where we're unique, and I won't make this more than it has to be, but where we're unique is that we really allow you to quickly onboard to major cloud services without the headache of knowing how those cloud services work. We provide a really easy to use platform for that offers scalability, flexibility, all that good stuff for WordPress, as well as other web applications. And you'll actually hear some of those words come up as questions that you should be asking yourself when deciding who to host with, or even how to host with your existing host. So let's kind of, excuse me, dive a little into it. And boy, there we go. Let's jump into the right slide. So we're going to try to go through sort of 10 major questions that I think an agency or freelancer should be asking themselves when looking at hosting. And this sort of first half really focuses on the customers you're dealing with. Normally I'd be like, show raise, raise your hands if X, Y, or Z, but in our virtual world, let's just kind of roll through it.
Robert, do you have any other slides? Because we just see the first slide right now.
Oh, I'm on a different slide, so why is that not? So you're still on the purple slide?
Yep, that shows your name, your title.
Huh. Oh, my screen sharing is paused. Okay, let's try this again.
There we go. Now we can see it. We can see your Twitter handle, your nice, beautiful picture.
Well, thank you. So, the best part is you missed the slide mistake, so now I won't replicate it. Anyway, so this is what I was just discussing about myself with agency experience, open source experience, former president of Joomla, and as much as Adrian likes to say I'm a WordPress OG, I have actually not been in the WordPress space directly, except for the last like 4 or 5 years. So, taking a lot of that open source experience, knowledge, and agency ownership experience forward has actually been really easy in WordPress. I wanted to go over sort of the two, what I'm calling major themes of the types of questions we should be asking. And the first batch is really about customers and how you're evaluating customers, the right questions to ask of your customers with regards to what they may or may not need in their life. Oh, that was already a good question popping up out there too. I will jump into that. Thank you, Brandon. let's just go through some of these customers things before I lose my train of thought entirely, even though I said please ask questions away. Uh, Onto the customer side of the universe. These guys are, thanks, Brandon. Brandon's really being entertaining on the side here. The first thing we really want to look at from the customer side is what is the customer business? And we all think that everyone's online just for online's sake, but we have all sorts of types of customers who need to do something online and need hosting that really addresses those problems specifically. So we can really start simple and go from they just need a shingle, a yellow pages ad, for those of you who still remember what yellow pages are, and that's one of those just trivial things, and folks can go anywhere for that. So when you're working with them to put that shingle together and get them online, um, you know, you're going to want to evaluate, what your hosting relationships are, and uh, where to take the most advantage of those. Obviously, as you get deeper and deeper into e-learning with like Lifter, if you're using Groundhogg as your back end CRM, more and more e-commerce, you're selling stuff. You need real time shipping information, taxing, all those forms and data and inventory and all that. Obviously, the complexity of what you need to have on hand from your host to make sure that everything works correctly and as expected is really important. So a good deep dive into what your customer's business is very important. That will go into helping set expectations for your customer and between you and your host. So, does your host support different types of businesses that your customers might have? Everyone's going to say they support everything because it's just hosting. Some folks do other things better than others, and that's very important. And recognizing whether your host can do e-commerce well versus a bunch of static sites, or getting ready for indexing for lots of content, or maybe it's not a lot of traffic but a lot of database back and forth with something on the learning management side of the universe. Those are important things to recognize and look to kind of take advantage of. Customer type. Now, once you figure out the business, you need to find out uh, the appetite your customer may have for different types of solutions. Are are they going to be diving personally deep into server infrastructure and you know Linux and MySQL and all that for different reasons? Do they have a level of technology staff in house to work with all those features and tools in the hosting environment space? Are they going to care about how much RAM specifically, or how many cycles, or how many PHP workers, and all that kind of stuff? Or are they really, really completely hands off? Does your host allow for root access and getting, being able to shell in, whether it's a need of, the agency or the customer to be able to do that? Or is it really just like, we want simple, simple, simple? Tell us that it's on, tell us that it's running, tell us that it's running well, and, keep us safe and secure. One of the, I'm going to jump to Brandon on this one because this is actually a good place for it. If you look at something like Object Cache Pro, which Cloudways recently partnered with to enable, super duper caching with, awesome back end technologies. And, are you as the agency aware of that? Are your customers aware of that? Is that something important? That obviously ties into what kind of business they have, how much data is going back and forth. But looking at, that sort of type for technology, appetite for really getting deep into the hosting environment, it is important. And, this is something that you can apply to yourself, as well as, what kind of customer types can be handled by the host you're looking at. Customer expectations. So customers are going to have a number of expectations. Can your host satisfy those expectations? One of the critical ones, and I'm have this sort of generic overall thing called customer expectations, is going to be support. And knowing what level of support you and your customers are going to need and expect is critical. Are you technical enough in house? These things sort of tie in together. Uh, can you handle, based on your customer type, enough on your own? Are you going to have to reach out? Are you going to have to reach out with some kind of service level agreement? Do you promise your customers a response about a hosting issue, within 2 hours, 10 minutes? Can your host fulfill those expectations? Do they need to have someone who picks up the phone? Is email and ticket support enough? Or of course somewhere in between with online chat to make that happen. The customer stack. We're here. This is Groundhog Day. Everyone's going to be on WordPress. But that stack may not be the only thing that your customers are interested in. They may rely on a WordPress stack for XYZ sites or applications, but are there other tools that are also being integrated? Is there some custom PHP Node.js application that's running in the background? Are you having to integrate with different types of databases? Can your web host support Postgres, Maria, MySQL, some NoSQL database? Uh, you know, Understanding that very critical component of the stack, uh, you know, helps you ask the right questions of your host with regards to, can you support this? Frankly, a lot of strictly WordPress hosts are just going to worry about that WordPress stack. So that's kind of the sort of first round of what's important for customers. Are there any questions about how you and your customer might be evaluating a host, and where you think where your experiences have led you to a unique kind of question? I'm trying to cover them sort of generically so that you start thinking about all the details within those. So, just kind of bounce back. What is the customer business? What is the customer type? Business is pretty straightforward, static, very dynamic. Can the host support that customer type? Are they going to want to dig deep into the technology stack? Are they going to be wanting, customer or you, going to be shelling in SFTP, doing who knows what, or is it just you know screen click driven? Customer expectations primarily around support. What is the customer going to want? What are you going to want and need? I mean, your personal needs may be different than your customer needs. You might need support very minimally, but if something happens, your customer might need support within 2 minutes and want someone on the phone. Can your host provide that? How do they provide that? And of course, supporting not just the WordPress stack, not just Linux, Apache or Nginx or whatnot, any other tool sets that might be integrated with that WordPress stack. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so that's all right.
I don't see any other questions. I do. Keep going, Robert.
No, that's fine. Excuse me. Uh-oh. I wonder if Adrian's got some questions already. Uh-oh. Brandon's got another one. How about something? I want to get to it before I go to this next section here. Oh, Brandon's too slow to type. How easy you can transfer from one server to another? Oh, that's actually a great question. I'll touch on that infrastructure. You're kind of beating me to some of the things we're gonna hit on. So that's a great question, though. Uh, let's head that way. Now, I'm not an infrastructure tech guy. I know enough to be dangerous. Uh, I know what I feel are important questions to ask. These are questions that I ask, and I've used at least 20 different hosting companies in my life. And you probably know the names of most of them. So, you know, question number 5, performance. And we evaluate performance in so many different ways because applications can be very different. Everyone's going to ask, how fast is it? Is it super, super fast? Well, it's a metric. And, you can take your site, your web application, move it from one hosting company to another hosting company and see differences, one way or the other. The bigger question around performance is what happens when it's your app, when it's your site, when there's something in there that's not, for lack of a better word, performant, something that's not optimized. Can your host fix it? Now, by fix it, I mean a couple of things. Can they at least identify it? Do they have tools that will notify you of maybe queries that have gone out of control and are just looping and sucking all the life out of your server? Or will they have a team that's available to kind of dig through almost on a consultative level through your application and see what's going on? So this is the kind of performance question you want to ask. Yes, I want it to be as fast as possible, and we can go through the nitty gritty of how many CPUs are there, how much RAM is there, are they using SSD hard drives? But performance is more than just the bare metal. Let's call it that. The performance also relies on how that hosting stack has been created in the first place. How are they optimizing, for Apache, for Nginx, for MySQL, or are they just throwing up Linux servers and hoping you have a good day with it? So there's software at all these levels that needs to be evaluated. Core software on the hosting side, and then even your software. Can you, a consultative relationship with your hosting company to debug these kinds of performance issues. Agency support tier. Yes. So we'll get to that. Brandon keeps driving some good questions here. So performance scaling. One of the important aspects of your host is how can you scale? Does your host scale? The Brandon mentioned in one of his questions how easily can you transfer from one server to another. So that's really important. Many hosts have different tiers for your web applications and websites. Are you hitting a button and saying, just give me more of everything and not worrying about it? Or are you going through a laborious process of switching from something shared to something managed or on a VPS? What is that process? How is it done? Can you scale back? Can you scale up and back? Can you scale certain parts of your application? We've seen at Cloudways a number of customers who have databases on separate application servers just so they can scale the front end or the back end differently depending on how that application works. So figuring out ways, does your host fundamentally understand what scaling is, and do they have a process, whether it's difficult or easy, that you can go through? Obviously, preferably easy. It's nice to be able to just have a button and say, take me from, a starter DigitalOcean hosting experience to, a GCP or AWS super experience. So, and you'll be able to do that with one click is fantastic, and not worrying about the DNS, all the DNS stuff, all that internet stuff that most of us don't want to deal with anymore. It should be much more uh, managed automatic for you. Uh, from scaling, we want flexibility. So this kind of ties into customer type in that is there flexibility to do multiple things. If you are a very technically savvy agency and you want to be able to get into your boxes and do all sorts of voodoo, or your box, I'll put it in quotes, into your hosting infrastructure and do a lot of very technical voodoo, can you tweak your configuration files for a specific deployment? But also, can you hide all that from your customers if they have access to their hosting environment so they don't accidentally break something and cause trouble, whatnot. Flexibility is also, can you scale horizontally? Can you scale vertically? Can you, again, using that example of being able to split, applications from databases and have multiple services handle multiple aspects of your website. These are important things that help get the best performance. And can your host support all that kind of flexibility? Let's look at sort of the anti example of that would be something like Wix. You have no flexibility. You're on that, and you kind of get what you get, and enjoy it, and don't try to do anything outside of that Wix box. Whereas with WordPress hosts and more traditional hosts, you can be very flexible with what kind of applications to deploy, how you deploy them, and get that support and performance that you need. Which ties into my favorite thing about certain types of managed WordPress hosts, the walled garden. There are, is the host you're looking at a walled garden? Are you limited to the types of applications you can install or how you install them? Is it pulling teeth to get, you know, let's say, just for the sake of argument, is it pulling teeth to get Groundhogg and Lifter and all other kinds of plugins onto your site? Do they have to be specially approved? Do they have to be tweaked and walked through? How does that affect deployment time? How does that affect your budget? Because time is money, and getting to do that. So if you are not interested in being in a walled garden, you should find out if that's what your host does to you. And there are some very powerful large hosts that do that. And there are good reasons to do that. It simplifies their support and performance work, but that's not necessarily best for you as an agency or for your customers. Uh, find out what that walled garden is and really the details of that so that, they may have a list of approved plugins. Can you work outside their approved box? If they can, find out what the headaches are around that. Those are sort of that question of flexibility um, versus a walled garden.
I just want to jump in for a second, if that's okay.
Sure,
I've
please.
I've been loitering around in the background, and I'm seeing some questions come in from Brandon, and I'm sorry for the other person whose name I have no idea what alphabet that even is. I'm just ignorant.
Yep, I just saw that.
But it looks like people are genuinely curious about some of the finer the finer points, technology and pricing behind it. And frankly, I'm a big Cloudways fan, and we have the least amount of issues for people who are using Groundhogg when they host with Cloudways. So I think if we want to just like straight up nerd out about some of the technical details and which servers people should be using, and after you're done your I think you have 2 more points after this one, we can just go full out and nerd out and talk about the different options that are available for people. We're just like, I just want to switch to Cloudways.
Perfect. Yes. So then we'll have a dialogue around that and grab people from the audience to
Let's do it. Yeah.
It's a lot easier to chit chat than sometimes just to drive through these slides, as you know. So let's just kind of crunch through the last two, and then yeah, we'll go through all those questions that are building up. So that's awesome. Thanks, Adrian. Oops, jump over here. Staging. So that's, I already know this is a question in there, and switching from one server to another. A lot of times people do that for staging purposes. How easy is it to have a staging environment, production environment? At Cloudways, we that comes with any application server install. So we try to make that as easy as possible for at least staging code. No one's really cracked the how do we stage a database mystery yet, and have that go back and forth to keep that in sync on an ongoing basis. But for the most part, your better hosts will have a way of creating, managing, supporting, and deploying from staging. And I think that's, these days as agencies and for customers, it's critical to be able to do that as part of the overall experience of working with your host. So I'm throwing that in there as, transferring, staging, all that kind of good stuff. If you can do it with one click, that's how it should be.
I have a question about staging, because this is actually a question that we get a lot within the Groundhogg audience, is that you have Groundhogg or WooCommerce or Easy Digital Downloads or one of these like larger platform plugins in which the data is in a constant state of change, because you're always getting new orders, or the logs are always changing, or the tags in a contact change, or someone's student course progress and Lifter LMS changes, right? Like those changes happen within the database. But when we think of like a staging, we make changes to the website and then we push, but that pushes everything, right? And that then overwrites anything that happened on the live site. So like what is the way, is there like a clever way that Cloudways deals with that change, or with dealing with those sorts of like highly dynamic sites?
Let's take WooCommerce as probably the most brutal example of this.
Brutal example.
It is the brutal example because everything is still stored in the WP, what's called WP what field?
Posts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's nothing much you can do about on that side of the universe. You want to today. So let me jump to that in a sec. But WordPress staging there are opportunities to make that much more mature. Let's put it that way. And typically the safest deployment I see of staging is working off your staging environment, pushing files, not data, and then tweaking what those options and things might be on the production side after you've already done that on staging. It's a hard one because again, that database, that dynamic database versus a static database issue, or the rapidly changing customer created data is right now not really solved. So what WooCommerce is doing, this is the exciting thing in the next major version of WooCommerce, which will be late spring, early summer, knock on wood. That will actually start separating out all that WooCommerce data to a separate set of tables.
Mm-hmm.
So at which point, we as hosts, I'm sure we won't be the only ones, will start looking at how to deploy the database and sort of the more control data that you're using to tweak and modify the actual core portions of the WordPress site, and leaving that WooCommerce data all alone.
Right. So you'd be able to like exclude specific tables from the migration process.
Exactly.
Right.
But we have to wait kind of in the case of WooCommerce for that to really happen.
Is that an option now to like control which tables are migrated?
Boy, I should know this answer. When I hit the stage button, I just hit go because I'm not doing anything like on my test sites along that. Not the most technical here for that answer. Does but Groundhog's got a separate set of tables, correct?
Yeah,
Or yeah. So I mean, those are perfect examples of where you can do table includes and excludes, and I'd have to really double check on that to get you a proper answer. Maybe someone from Cloudways who's in the chat can double check my knowledge on that. So yeah, staging is still, most people use staging, pre-initial deployment right now. If you're going to rebuild your whole site, throw it out there, you can work on staging, have an existing site, and then kind of swap sites as you go. But the dynamic data, customer generated content, always one of those tricks. I'm seeing in the chat, yeah, maintenance mode. Yes, it's an important feature. Yeah, taking advantage of that for any kind of major upgrades is hard. Again, the problem is, how big is that site, and can you afford to take it offline for an hour, to do a full push?
for sure.
And that's a little harder. And
Okay.
you see some of this function a little bit more accessible at like the super high level for, like, let's take Azure as an example, Microsoft's Azure cloud hosting platform. But they're built around that Microsoft universe and have a billion different ways to tweak that. It's not a great hosting environment for WordPress. I'll tell you that from personal experience. Even though you can do one-click deploys on Azure, that's not what they're interested in doing. They're interested in getting you onto the Microsoft stack, and you can do a ton of crazy, phenomenal things with Microsoft SQL or SQL Azure, or Azure or SQL for Azure, however they call it these days. Where yeah, you can do a whole bunch of table exclusions and really smart stuff. I think the WordPress hosting space is getting there. It's that, typically the needs for most people on WordPress over the last, almost 20 years were not that high. Over the last few years, we've seen, customers really saying, we want WordPress, we want it with WooCommerce, we want it with all sorts of types of applications, and we need to have more of that enterprise level hosting support. And, is there anyone right now that can be the sort of de facto enterprise host? I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of room for WordPress hosts like Cloudways to keep heading in that direction. Can we get an evaluation of our site to determine needs? Hi, Patricia. I'm seeing that in the chat. Hey, I had my email on the. If I didn't have it on the first slide, it'll definitely be on the last slide. Reach out to me on email. We can always take a look at that kind of stuff. What's the difference between Cloudways and Linode? Oh, didn't cover that. That's a great question, Zane, actually. Cloudways is the platform that supports all of these different, more traditional backend services. So we have the same platform across all these. If you're on the Cloudways platform, you're accessing Linode, DigitalOcean, AWS, Vultr, or Google Cloud the exact same way. So we have a consistent environment that makes it really easy to spin up apps on top of this. If you're a Linode expert and you're happy being, in the Linode world, that's fine. We, have support above and beyond that. We have, applications that are, tuned to being run on all those different environments. And if you ever want to switch environments, it's trivial and easy. You're not going through some really complicated pull this off Linode, push this onto AWS. We have platform tools and support to make that happen. So that's sort of the difference. We're that superstructure on top of all these other more baseline cloud services. Great. Phew, got that answered correctly. So that's the staging environment. Let's see. Last part, and I've kind of touched it back and forth. Does your WordPress host really know WordPress? Can they support it? Do they have folks that understand, where WordPress has been, where it's going, our environments tweaked and maintained to support that. There are plenty of shared hosts out there in the world that, they're just spinning up something and you're going to be sharing it with a million other people. Good luck. Throw up WordPress, on your own using some kind of tool. On Cloudways, we're building applications that are, one-click application installs that are tweaked to work on all of these environments. So if you're using WordPress with Lifter and Groundhogg as a solution, that's awesome. And, we have the solution for that. That's, one-click ready and performance tweaks for all that, plus the support teams around that. So being able to ask, your hosting company, how do you support WordPress today? How are you going to support it tomorrow? How knowledgeable is your team around WordPress? How do I get these answers solved on WordPress? Because there are always two different sets of questions. There's the hosting set of questions and there's the WordPress set of questions. And, how do those interact and play nicely together? So those are the 10. And I'm just going to run through them again so you guys can see them. We have know your customer's business. Ask the questions around that. What do they do? Why do they do it? How do they do that? What kind of customers are they? How geeky? How much do their hands getting dirty? How much do you like getting your hands dirty? And can your host support those different types of expectations around support, and expectations around stack requirements? Then diving into performance. There's all the technical nitty gritty, but performance is more than just bare metal. It's also about how your host can support your specific applications and help migrate them, help look for issues, and just make it a better experience. A lot of hosting is commoditized. A lot of people offer the same thing. It used to be back in the day is, can you get those three nines? Can you get those 4 nines, 5 nines? People just want as many nines as possible these days, and most hosts can do that. In fact, most hosts utilize a lot of these platforms anyway that we talk about quite clearly and transparently at Cloudways. And, we're trying to give you the most, scalability, flexibility, around that. Is your host a walled garden? Do they give you all that flexibility? Can you handle things like staging and multiple server environments, distributed server environments for types of applications, like we've talked about, splitting front ends and back ends, static pages, static site generation, all those kinds of things. Where does your host understand those technologies and tools and requirements? Can it help you and facilitate you in utilizing those? And what are the best practices? We see at Cloudways that hosting needs to be much more consultative. There are applications that are much more complex. Who would have thought of something like Lifter or Groundhogg running on WordPress 10 years ago? You wouldn't have. You'd have been like, no, that's just for blogs. But the application environment for WordPress has changed dramatically in 10 years. It's a part of it's a growing platform for different stuff. And you look at things like Gutenberg, which is a JavaScript based tool set, but that's going to be in there. And all these things are making WordPress more valuable every day for different needs and requirements. And thinking about what's next. So now it's totally open season, and feel free to always reach out to me, email, Twitter, if you have additional questions.